Well, good morning and welcome to Riverwood's pre-service gathering. We're going to take about 15 minutes to have a conversation with Winnipeg's former police chief, Devon Clunis, and I want to invite you to that conversation right now. Well, Devon, it is so great to have you join us today. Thank you for the time and for your willingness to have a conversation with us. So I think my first question would be, what does a former police chief do in retirement? What do you do after being a police chief?
Oh my goodness, there are so many options, but for myself right now, Pearline and I opened a consulting company. So we do consulting work. I do a lot of consulting work in police and across Canada and into the US. And Pearline and I, we write children's books together, if you're aware of that. So we've published two children's books as well. So there's no shortage of things to do.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Well, we want to get right to our topic today because
Mhm.
the news this last week, I imagine you've been following it. It has just exploded in the last 2 weeks as a result of the killing, the death of George Floyd. So I'm really super curious because not only are you a former police chief and police
Yes.
officer, you also have a degree in divinity, so you're a Christ follower. You're also Jamaican Canadian, so
Yes.
obviously you are somebody who is living in this culture and feels the impact of these things. So when you watch the news, what's on all those fronts? What's going through your mind? What are you thinking when you see everything that's happening this last week?
Yeah, as I said, being bombarded from many different angles. First, as a person of color, obviously, a black male who, we have spent a significant amount of time living and working in the United States, so very much aware of that dynamic. And so, as a black person, certainly hits you very deep at your heart, at the soul of who we are. But, secondly, when I watched that, I just saw a person. And the fact that we saw the excruciating almost 9 minutes of that, doesn't matter if you're black, white, whatever your religious affiliation is, anyone, just as a person in humanity, that really touched me. But as a police officer, because I do realize vast majority of police officers are caring, compassionate, law-abiding individuals, and recognize that the actions of those four was reflecting very negatively on the entire institution of police and not really hurt me as well. So I had a myriad of emotions that were going through me and continues to do so.
Yeah, so as a the police chief part of you, how would you have dealt with that situation if you, or maybe you had faced something like that, but how does a police chief deal with that?
And again, we have two different dynamics in the US and in Canada. I can say honestly, I could not foresee something like that happening in our country simply because of the way that our officers are trained, the way that we see our role in community. But as a police chief in Canada, immediately you would have the ability not to fire someone, but you can suspend them immediately without or with pay, and then the investigative process would be undertaken. And the beauty in our country, that investigative process now would be taken by an organization that would be independent from the police service, which I believe is critical.
Okay, so I think there's a part of me this last week that was kind of I entered the week kind of saying, well, I'm not racist. I think I felt a little defensive, right? Maybe they call this, I think there's a name for it now, white fragility. And then I ended the week going, gee, am I racist? I think I started asking a lot more questions. But I think the fact that we live in friendly Manitoba maybe
Yep.
throws it off a little bit. Is Winnipeg got racism, and how systemic is it? And what do you know of racism in Winnipeg?
Oh, absolutely. You know what? And typically when we talk about this, I don't necessarily like the word racism because I said, you know what? I see us as one human race. We have different cultural expressions. We have different ethnicities, certainly. But I say it's this bias that we do have. And I think bias, or if you want to call it racism, it is a human condition. And certainly we'll see more of it in different places around the world. But yes, it is here, not to the same degree that you would experience in other places, even across our country. But having said that, we have to be very vigilant that we don't allow it to take firm root in our backyard right here. And again, as somebody who's lived and worked both in the US and Canada, I say there's stark differences between the two countries when it comes to, if you want to call it, racism.
Now, this question might cut a little deep, but I'm interested. Have you had personal experiences where you have been profiled or you felt the impact of a racial bias that is unfair?
Absolutely. I cannot say within the policing culture, but since we arrived here in 1975, absolutely. Throughout my childhood, my years in school, as a police officer, not from within, but because people see you wearing the uniform, absolutely many clear examples, right in your face type of racism. But for me, very early on, I developed a really strong sense of who I am as a black person. And so for me, somehow, my character was to use that to deflect when people would try to hurt me by trying to treat me in a racist manner.
Okay. Well, I realize this is way too simplistic of a question, but if we were to boil this down, if it had sort of a bit of a heartbeat, what's at the heartbeat of racism or racial bias or all the tensions that we're seeing? What do you think sort of at the core of that?
I think primarily it is fear, fear of the unknown. I think, we spend a lot of time in schools now reading our books to kids. And if you go to, let's say, kindergarten or the early years, you see this incredible diversity, but kids aren't even aware of it. The person is just their friend. And as we grow and we become aware and we start treating people differently, my challenge to us as a society, particularly again here in Winnipeg and in Canada, is to ensure that we don't now start to ingrain those sentiments in children as they get older and older. So getting to know someone, I think that is a key. Travel, as they said, really is a key. It's the medicine to some of this ignorance and the fear that we have of someone until we get to really know them. We have to get to know people.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back for a little more conversation. Well, good morning. For those of you just joining us, we are partway through a conversation with Devon Clunis, Winnipeg's former police chief. Devon is a Jamaican-born Canadian. He was Canada's first black police chief. He currently runs a consulting company along with his wife, as well as writing children's books. And I want to invite you to our second part of our conversation. All right. Well, Devon, thank you so much again for joining us and giving Riverwood Church this time. And we're thrilled to have you here. For those that maybe aren't aware, you were a police officer and then Canada's first black police chief for 4 years in the Winnipeg Police Force. And when you were on the force, what kind of racism or race issues did you have to deal with as a leader in Winnipeg? I'm guessing that there might be some Indigenous component to that because our Indigenous people will often feel and experience a form of racial bias. Talk to us a little bit about the Winnipeg culture.
Absolutely. And when, again, you look at Winnipeg having one of the largest urban Indigenous population, and so, yes, you would have that, that tug of war, so to speak, between police and the community, because the community is incredibly marginalized. And so one of the things that we did was to have specific units or engagement within both the Indigenous community, but also recognizing the newcomer community, because something that's really important for us to recognize when in relation to newcomers, many are coming from areas of the world where there is no sense of a relationship between police and the community. So somebody will come in with that mindset. So I said it was really important for us to share with individuals when they arrive in this city, in this country, the different contexts of policing in Canada, that we're here to serve the community. In relation to the Indigenous community, the very same messages have to be brought forward because we're trying to erode, historic behavior or relationships between police and these specific communities. So it's very important that we be proactive. So we were incredibly proactive in building those relationships.
Okay, I'm not looking for a dictionary definition, but what would be your kind of practical definition? And I know you've already said you don't like the term racism, but if you were to define what racism is or racial bias or all these tensions, what's your definition of that?
As I said, we're all going to have bias. For me, it becomes racism when you're in a position of power or authority and you can use your bias to now limit the potential or the opportunities of someone else. You may have someone who is very racist, but if they don't have the opportunity or the power to use that to diminish somebody else, well, it's almost benign, so to speak. What racism is when it becomes institutionalized and your hiring practices actually limit the potential of others because of their cultural background.
So I mentioned that I kind of started the week, a little more defensive personally, going, I'm not racist, and then started asking myself a little more of a probing question: Am I racist? Do I have racial biases? How would I know if I'm racist?
Well, again, I take it back to where I said, not necessarily the word racist, it's bias. And I think all of us, doesn't matter who you are, we have bias. And what I've always challenged myself to do, even in terms of policing, is that I should never use whatever bias I have inherently to limit someone else or hold something against someone else. That's the key. So I don't think you could find an honest person who would say, I don't have a bias. But no, the intelligent and the caring person will be aware of that bias, and actually something will click in the back of our minds, or just the spidey senses will go up. You realize I'm treating someone that way, not objectively. It's because of my own bias. So we actually have bias-free policing is what we call it, or fair and impartial policing, where we try to expose people to these biases. So it's not that you're racist necessarily, it's that you're a human being. And I believe every human being, if you look at it objectively, you'll find that we all have some biases. And it's important to be aware of that bias.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing you saying is that maybe this racism, if I can use that simple term again, isn't just a white people problem, but people of other cultures and other colors of skin could actually be racially biased.
Absolutely, because if you're a human being, I say you have that bias within you, and it becomes racial now when we're now using that against somebody from a different cultural group. So I don't think there's a group of us who will say that no one within our culture group can't be racist. Yes, it is a human condition.
That's fascinating. I love the humility in that. I love the truth in that. I think that's powerful. So you have children. I don't know what ages they are, if they're aware of the news. Do you talk to your kids about this stuff?
Oh, absolutely. One is in Vancouver, one is in Ottawa. Both were at rallies similar to what we had in Winnipeg yesterday. And yes, we've been having a lot of conversations about this, and one of my daughters was saying to me, and one's 32, one's 27, that really until this event, they almost felt a little bit isolated because they grew up in what they thought was just this bubble, not fully aware of all, the cultural issues to the same extent. And they're biracial children, right?
Yeah.
So, again, it speaks to what we have here in Winnipeg. Not saying we're perfect, and we have to learn and continue to grow, but we have a lot to build on.
What's the you have some studies in Divinity, and you're a Christ follower. What's a Christ following biblical approach to these issues? Is there something specific for Christians that we need to really be aware of and apply?
Oh, absolutely. Jesus himself said it. Who's your neighbor? Love thy neighbor. And it's easy for us to say, yeah, I love my neighbor if they look like me. But who's my neighbor? And I said, in this city, we really have a great opportunity to express that biblical principle of love your neighbor as yourself. Treat each one equally. See the inherent dignity in each individual. It's that simple. And if we did that, we wouldn't be talking about racism, because we would be treating everyone like we would treat ourselves, right? And so for me, it becomes racism when we're treating someone less than we would treat ourselves.
Okay, we got about half a minute left. If you were to give me, maybe even as you would have been speaking to your police officers under you, if you were to give them a 1 or 2 point, do this, and you'll make the world a better place. Do this, and you'll combat some of this racial tension. What would you tell me and tell our audience today? What can we do practically this week to combat this? Is it go out marching? Is it protesting? Is it sending? What is it, or is it something more personal?
I think it's something more personal. All of those things are good, but what I would like to say is when you go home today, sit and meet and talk with someone from a different cultural group. Get to know someone from outside your own specific ethnic background, and get to know them as people. Love them as yourself. It's that simple.
Powerful. That's so powerful. Devon, thank you so much again for your time. We trust that God will continue to bless you and your family, and we really appreciate all your service to our city and your continuing service and your children's books. Looking forward to checking into those. God bless you. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.